All right, so this is probably the topic that you've been waiting for, which is mic placement and really how to get good sounds. Hey guys, thanks for joining me on the channel again. My name's Steve Kinney. I'm an engineer and a producer. Today we're going to be talking about acoustic guitars and how to get a really good sound from your Apollo Solo or your Apollo Twin or whatever interface that you're using right now. So this is the third time I've tried to make this video. It's really hard to do this video because it's really a nuanced topic depending upon your guitar type, your microphone type, the room that you're in. It's all going to be very specific, but this video is going to cover a bunch of tips to get the best sound for you. So now if you're new to the UAD platform, I'd encourage you to check out my Console Classic Sessions pack. It's available now. I've got channel strip preset settings for vocals, acoustic guitars, bass, and electric guitars, and it's the quickest way to get production ready sounds right from your Apollo Solo with a click of a button. Before we get started, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Let me know how you get your acoustic guitar sounds and what are your struggles, what are your best practices, and your favorite things to do to get the best sound where you're at. All right, let's go. So before we place any mics or set any levels, I want to go over a few pointers to keep in mind when you start your tracking session. The first pointer: are you recording for somebody else? Is there another guitar player in the room? If you only have an Apollo Solo with one headphone output, you definitely are going to want to have one of those headphone splitters. I say this in numerous videos. It's really handy to have one of those. But I also need to mention the headphone extension cable. Last thing you want to be doing is tripping over your cables or trying to play in an awkward position right next to your desk because you don't have a long enough cable. So just pick one of them up. They're cheap and they're really important. The second pointer to keep in mind is know the sound that you're going for. Are these acoustic guitars going to be the centerpiece of the song? Is it going to be right out front? Or are they just going to be this percussive mid-rangey thing kind of settled underneath some electric guitars? Or is it going to be this really nice finger-picked acoustic-y thing going on? And is it going to be a really soft, intimate sound? So yes, definitely know your sound. It's important because that's going to help you determine what mics to use and any extra special stuff that we're going to be looking at in the next pro tip, which is number 3, know your room. So in all of these examples, I'm recording here in my main room with my main desk, but this isn't typically where I like to track my guitar. I usually like to either rent out a studio for the day or I go to one of my buddy's houses where it's really quiet. And usually I'll only get like 1 or 2 tracks done there because I don't really have a big session, but if I have a massive session, I'll usually go to a studio. But for today's video, we're here, and in this room, it's a concrete box. It's really reverberant. So what would I do to treat this room? Well, for one thing, since I live here, I'm not going to turn it into a studio where I have tons of stuff hanging all over the walls, and normally if I have a window, I'd want to try to treat that a little bit, but I'm not going to do that. So I think that this room is okay for doing demos. You just have to approach it the right way. So what would I do? So in this scenario, what I would make sure to do is I'd put my engineering hat on and I'd remember that my microphones have particular polar pickup patterns. And so I'd make sure that I put them in cardioid so it rejects most of what's behind the mic. And then I would point the mics away from the window. And then from there, I'd kind of position them however I'd like to for the guitar. So that's just a pro tip if you have a window that sometimes has a little extra noise and that's the only spot that you kind of have to worry about. Now that we have all of that figured out, we're going to want to know what microphones are we using. Now this might be a scenario where you're just starting out in your production career and you only have one microphone, and that's certainly okay. So that kind of makes things a lot simpler. But if you have a mic locker and you got maybe 2 or 3 different mics to choose from or types of mics to choose from, you're going to want to know. So if you're building that big track and it's got tons of stuff going on, you just need some acoustic guitars in the background. Maybe something like a dynamic mic is going to be best for you rather than a condenser mic where it fills the whole frequency spectrum and now you got to compete with vocals and you got to compete with bass. Makes a big difference. It also could be a very creative decision there as far as what microphones that you go with as well. So that's something that you want to think about before you start setting anything up. And then lastly, what mic pre's work best with the mic that you've chosen and the guitar that you have? And believe it or not, it makes a big difference. On the topic of mic pre's and microphones, something that I really love to do is contrast sounds. So for example, I wouldn't put a tube mic with a tube mic preamp. I just probably wouldn't do that. I would want to have like a cleaner mic pre, something like maybe like an API or something like a Neve, just something that's solid state and not tubey in its characteristics. And then for something like a dynamic mic, I probably would use a tube mic pre just to kind of dirty it up and give it its own kind of sound. So now onto the topic that you've probably been waiting for, which is like mic placement and actually the meat and potatoes of getting the sound. So if you just have one microphone, what do you do? Typically, what an engineer usually likes to start with is placing the mic kind of halfway between the end of the neck and the bridge area, which happens to be somewhere around the 12th fret or the 14th fret. You kind of want to hover in that area, and you want to listen for weird things such as resonance, and you want to listen for balance between the bass and the brightness of the guitar. And that's the name of the game right there, finding that nice balance. Now, if it's something like an SM57, if that's what you have, or like that dynamic style mic, another really good thing to do is kind of point it at the little curved area on the body of the guitar, kind of away from the sound hole towards the neck. I've usually found that that kind of typically sounds really good for me. And here's an example of what that might sound like. So what do you do if you have just a condenser mic, something like an AKG Perception 120, or maybe you have the AT 2020, maybe you have an Aston Spirit, and that's what I have. I love the Spirit. What do you do? Well, you kind of approach it the same way. You kind of want to just find that happy medium, the nice balance. So there's no special tricks here. There's nothing crazy going on. You're just kind of listening for balance, listening for those weird resonances. And again, it's very specific to each guitar. For example, the Maton that I have that I love to play with has this little crack running down the body, and it gives this really weird resonance tone, which you can hear in this example. Now, of course, that sounds terrible, and we want to avoid that, so I wouldn't have that mic anywhere near that area, or if I start to hear that resonance sound, I'm going to move it. It's obviously going to be in a different spot for every guitar, so just play around. Take a day off and just move mics around, play around with it. Have your headphones on the entire time and just move it just a little bit at a time and just listen. That's the way that everybody really does it in the industry. They listen for that sound. Now finally, we come to my favorite technique that I personally use all the time, and it is a stereo miking technique. Now similarly to the earlier tips that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I love to contrast sounds. So what do I mean by that? So in the case of the stereo mic setup, what I like to do is contrast a dynamic mic with something like a tube condenser mic or a condenser mic. One of them, you get this really beautiful full spectrum sound, and then the other one is kind of more mid-rangey, and you combine the two and it sounds cool. You can pan them left and right, and now you got this wide sounding acoustic guitar, or you can kind of pan them to one side and you still get this really detailed, articulate sounding acoustic guitar. And then if you record them both and pan two sets of sounds one way or two sets of sounds the other way, now you got this really full sounding acoustic sound. So it's really cool. But you have to make sure that you listen for phase cancellation or any sort of phase problems. Now phase is when the audio waveform, that as the audio wave is moving through the air, it hits one mic at one time, and then it hits the other mic at another time. One wave is going down, the other wave is going up equally, so it cancels out the sound source. Most of the time, because of the rooms that you're in and because of how you place the mics, they're never going to be perfectly out of phase. So you're always going to hear a little bit of something, but the sound usually starts to have this really weird sound, which you can hear in this example here. So what can you do if you have phase problems? Well, first thing you can do is move the mic. You're probably going to hear those weird resonances build up and weird frequency buildup happen if you place the mics wrong anyway. So move the mic around until they start to sound good. But then the last thing that you can do is always play around with this little polarity reverse switch on your interface. Especially if you have the Apollo, it's really easy to do. Most devices have the polarity reverse. But if they don't, you can go into your DAW. Your DAW usually has one of those as well. You just flip it and you go, which one sounds better? Does it sound better with the polarity flipped, or does it sound better with it not flipped? Once you've got your polarity figured out and you've got your mics dialed in, you now have this great sounding acoustic stereo image, and you can get an idea of what that sounds like in this example here. Alright, so thanks for hanging out with me on today's video. Alright, so some final thoughts here. First, I hope you really gathered some good info here and this helps you on your journey to making your acoustic guitar sound awesome in all of your projects. 2, I want to remind you that all of the sounds that you heard are available in the Console Classic Sessions Pack. It's available now. There's a link in the description. And 3, just a reminder, always listen for balance in your signal. You don't want to have any weird resonances because they will cause you problems later. And I've had so many projects where I heard the resonance later and I just tried everything to get rid of it, be it with tons of EQ cuts, and nothing did the trick. And then what I ended up doing is just re-recording the guitar, and then it was like, my mind was blown. It sounds so much better. So hopefully you can avoid that because that's always a headache. If you guys have any questions, just feel free, leave it in the comments below or hit me up on Instagram. I'd be happy to help you out on your journey. Thanks so much for watching.